hopefully you've got some of the wines that we'll be talking about this evening. We've got 5 wines that I've chosen specifically to demonstrate some different styles of making a sweet wine, and also some differences in the things to look for when you're wanting to pair them with specific desserts or foods. We are going to focus primarily on, well, only really on sweet foods this evening, although these wines are ones that you could consider having with savoury elements. I would like to talk about desserts and puddings, so that's the focus for this evening. Of course, if you want any questions or suggestions afterwards, you can of course drop me an email and I'll be happy to give you some suggestions for that as well. Okay, so if you do have your wines or any of the wines, I would say make sure you've got them all out of the fridge now. If you're able to get them into a separate glass each, that's perfect. If not, don't worry, I'm using just the one glass myself this evening and making good use of my spittoon as well. The first wine that we will be talking about is the Moscato d'Asti from Elio Perrone, and it's the Sorgau. So that is the bottle for you. So this is one of my absolute favourite wines. I must admit I did have a little small glass before we started, and I've just topped up for a little bit of a taster now. But I think I'll go through each one by doing a bit of a taste and a bit of a describing of the wine before I go into it too much. If you've got the wine as well, I can see that some of you have got the Moscato. Do open it up, get it in your glass and let me know what you're thinking. For me, it's just that really sweet, juicy grape, sort of distinctive quality from Moscato d'Asti, and the distinctive quality for Muscat as well. We're going to be talking about Muscat a fair amount this evening. Of the wines, 3 of them are Muscat based. But I mean, this is just such a ripe, fruity, juicy wine. It's got that really nice ripe peach, some orange blossom, and like I say, it's really juicy grapes. It's one of those grape varieties that when you're talking about it in a wine, you can say that it smells of grapes. For me, I don't know if anyone else has bought the candy floss grapes at all from Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's, the ones that apparently taste like candy floss. I don't know that they do, but they do have a really delicious, sweet sort of candy quality to them, which is really what I'm getting a lot with from this one. And it's got that really nice effervescence as well. We had a wine and a tasting a week or so ago that was similarly sparkling in this way, and it's definitely more of that one I describe as more of a froth than a fizz. It's similar with the Moscato d'Asti. It's not a real harsh sparkling wine. If I left this glass for 20 minutes, half an hour, it would be going on to verging onto flatness, which you don't want, but it's got a really nice effervescence to it, which keeps it nice and refreshing, which is great because the acidity isn't as high as some of the other wines. And when you've got a sweetness to a wine, you do also want that balance with the freshness as well. Otherwise, it can sometimes be a little bit cloying. So the sparkling element really does go with that. Now, if you do have some desserts, unfortunately, I didn't get around to sorting myself out some desserts, and it would have been quite a feat to eat 5 desserts on camera along with the wines. But what I will have, and what I have had with this before, is things like desserts, obviously with a lot of fresh fruit. So if you are deciding to just have, you've had an indulgent dinner and you just want a bit of a fresh fruit salad, or, you know, at the moment we're right in strawberry and raspberry season, those would be excellent ideas to have. Another thing that works perfectly with the Moscato d'Asti are desserts with an element of aeration themselves. Because you've got the bubbles of the wine, it really goes hand in hand. And I'm talking about things like ice cream and gelato and sorbets, possets, the way that they're made, even mousses, the way they're made with the air being incorporated in, it adds a lightness to the dessert that you need to sometimes have a wine with an element of lightness to as well. Otherwise, you're just out of balance in texture. The other great thing, obviously, with the Moscato d'Asti is that you're serving it from the fridge, or ideally you're serving it from the fridge. You're serving it nice and cold, probably around 4 or 5 degrees. And if you've got a cold dessert, so an ice cream or a sorbet, you know, or a gelato, then you want to have that element of temperature balance as well, just to keep everything in balance. That's one of the main takeaways from any kind of food and wine pairing, is that you're looking at a balance of flavour, of body, of texture. So yeah, and we also have used this wine for our bottomless brunches. If anyone's been to our bottomless brunches that we held in London, where the dessert was always churros, so the sort of deep fried little Spanish donutty tubes, that is also a really nice pairing with a wine like this. It's a delicate flaky pastry, so something like a palmier as well would be excellent, or perhaps petit four. It's a really nice entry level dessert wine. I say entry level as in for me, entry level is, I equate that a lot to sort of the time of day. So perhaps if you're having a midday meal in the garden perhaps, and you've got your desserts, and you want to have something that's not too high in the alcohol and is quite refreshing and is still quite fresh and juicy, then, you know, the Moscato d'Asti is one that I would turn to. And ordinarily, you would perhaps not have as heavy a dessert at that time of the day either. So for me, that's the perfect one to go to. Now, obviously, the reason that this is low in alcohol and as sweet as it is down to the method of production. The method of production is actually called the Asti method, and it's obviously, the wine is the Asti DOCG in northwest Italy, in Piedmont region. I'll go into it very quickly and as simply as I can for what the method actually pertains to. This is quite a relaxed evening, so I don't want it to be too much of a science lesson for everyone. And if you are enjoying it, do let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Do pop any questions in as well. But the Asti method is one where the Muscat grapes are left to be as healthy and as ripe as they can on the vine before they're picked. And it's only really healthy, ripe grapes that you want to use, because you really want to retain that lovely primary fruit, that clean crystalline fruit character. And you can't really do that with grapes that aren't going to have any of the, if they're a little bit under, you're not going to be able to hide that with any sort of secondary winemaking techniques. You're just looking for that really pure fruit. So the grapes are harvested, where they're then pressed, and then the juice is chilled and stored until it's needed. So they keep a bit of a retainer on the juice. When they are ready to make the wine, they warm the juice slightly it goes into a pressurized tank, and it's warmed to bring up to a temperature where fermentation is activated, which means that the yeast will start to eat the sugars, naturally occurring sugars in the juice, which produces the CO2. Initially, the CO2 is emitted from the tank, but then partway through the fermentation, they seal the tank, which then retains the CO2, which keeps the bubbles in the wine. And then when the fermentation allows the wine to reach around 5 to 7% alcohol, and for the pressure to be about 5 to 6 atmospheres, that's why they have the pressurized tank to be able to measure that, the fermentation is stopped by chilling the wine. And then they'll filter the wine still under pressure and then bottle it for sale. So you keep the fermentation stopping, obviously stops the yeasts eating any more of the sugar, so you're retaining the sweetness, and it also keeps the CO2 at the nice light level that they want. You'll have noticed that these bottles are just closed with a normal standard cork, and obviously that's another indication that it's not as sparkling as some other wines, because it doesn't need to be closed with the other type of cork and a cage to keep the pressure in. Now, the wine is from the Perone Estates. I think we just had a lovely picture from their vineyards, which I think we might be able to pop up and show you again. I mean, it's a really stunning picture. They are situated in the hills to the south of Asti in Castiglione Tinella, which is at 350 meters above sea level, which means they got lots of lovely sunshine, and the berries get their optimum ripeness but being on the hill as well, it means that they don't get overripe, so they've got the nice cooling element of the aspect as well. And the estate is currently run by the 5th generation Stefano. He's been running it since 1989. And it's just a fun little fact. He used to be a racing driver before taking over the family estate. So I think he's gone from quite a high-speed job to something that's perhaps not as high speed, probably high demand, but perhaps pays off. I mean, I know what I'd rather be doing, making delicious wine than racing a car around a track, but it's definitely a beautiful wine. And yeah, Adrian has just popped in the comments that it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful region. I don't know if you mean the wine or the imagery there, but either way, I think they both are. It really is delicious. If you do have any questions about this one while we're on it, do pop it in and let me know. Or if a question comes to you as we go through, pop it in the Q&A again and we can come to it there. Lovely. So let me move on to the other wine. Oh, we've got a little question there, really peachy. Do we sell other Moscatos? So this is the only Moscato that we sell. It's the one that we feel is the best. It's been a wine champion. Our wine champions offer for this year has just been released, and again it's won as a wine champion, and it has done for many years. It ticks all the boxes of what a Moscato d'Asti should be, and we haven't found one that surpasses it. Obviously Sarah, our buyer for Italy, is always on the lookout for other wines to see if anything can stand up to it, but this is the one for us. And I mean, it's very much a popular wine with members. It's definitely one for the members as well. Perfect. So let's go on to the second wine of this evening, which is the Côte de Leon Saint-Aubin from Domaine Cady. It's the 2009 vintage. I'm just going to pour myself a little sample of this one. Now I will just touch on something for this wine before we get really into it, which some of you may also be experiencing. I'm going to see if I can wipe away the condensation so that you might be able to hopefully see it in the bottom of my bottle. This wine, oh, that's not great. You can just see it there. So this wine, you might find that it's got some tartrate crystals in. If your bottle also has tartrate crystals, they're absolutely harmless. Don't worry about having them. They're actually quite nicely known as wine diamonds, but they are just where the naturally occurring tartaric acid in the wine, when it's under a cooler temperature, it binds with potassium, any sort of free potassium, and creates these little crystals. So obviously you don't want to take a full mouthful of them. They're not texturally that pleasant, but they are completely harmless. So if you do have any in your bottle as well, nothing to worry about. Now, if we have a look at this wine in comparison, look at that beautiful golden colour. It's really just a lovely opulent colour. I don't know, unfortunately my walls are blue, so I don't think that's helping as much. Let me move it to the door. There we go, and it's a bit more golden for you there. Now this one, oh, it just smells delightful. It really is just a lovely, luscious wine. For me, it's got a real nice baked apricot. There's some apple and pear. It's 100% Chenin Blanc, so you've got those Chenin qualities. So I always think of it as quite like orchard fruits, some nice baked pear, maybe a little bit of pear drops. And it's got a really nice creamy almond, and there's some honey in there as well. Now, some of those qualities are down to the method of production. This has had some botrytis grapes in there, and I'll go on to that in a moment. But I mean, it's just so concentrated on the fruit, and it's got that lovely clean acidity that stops it again from being a cloying syrupy style of wine. It really does cut through the sugar without losing the sweetness. You've got that lovely ripe and baked quality, and it is a baked fruit quality rather than, I know we're going down into sort of semantics, but rather than a cooked fruit, it's like a slow bake. It's had time for the naturally occurring sugars in the fruits, if you're imagining sort of baking an apricot or an apple, to sort of caramelize and intensify, rather than a sort of potentially a stewed or overcooked fruit quality. But this one, I think anything like baked cheesecakes or, you know, tarte aux pommes, tarte aux citron, something that's got a dense sort of dairy quality or a dairy equivalent quality to it. So in terms of sort of a baked cheesecake, you want that lovely caramelized, almost sort of lactic sugar, which you'll get from a baked cheesecake, which is nice and rich. But then you've got it's a gentle fruit quality, sort of a gentle apple and pear, and then you've got the nuttiness and the honey as well. But the acidity just keeps it all lovely and fresh and sort of balanced out. I think there's nothing worse than, oh, I do apologise if you can hear my neighbour's dogs. There's nothing worse than when you're having a really rich, you know, luscious dessert, and then it kind of just, before you're able to enjoy the next bite, you want something as a palate cleanser, and the acidity in this really does that. Now let's talk about the flavours of the honey and the almond and those really nice citrusy. There's a little bit of a preserved lemon, maybe like a little baked lemon in there as well. Yeah, Kath said about the caramelised flavour present in baked apples. Yes, or a tarte tatin. Oh gosh, tarte tatin, that would be delightful. That's what I might make for the weekend. Well, like I say, this is a wine that has been made with grapes that have undergone noble rot, which is the rot that we refer to when the conditions are right for the Botrytis cinerea to have a really amazing impact on the grapes. We've got a picture of some grapes that have got the noble rot on them, which we'll be able to show you now. Now, it doesn't look very pleasant, doesn't look very appealing at all, but it's this fuzzy grey rot, mold, fungus really that is on the grapes. It is the same fungus as grey rot, and noble rot only occurs when it is in the, like I say, the optimum conditions. So for that, the grapes must be fully ripe for it to form, and they must be grown in an area that has humid, misty mornings and sunny, dry afternoons. Now that's because the damp in the morning allows the rot to develop, and the fungal spores will sort of pierce the skin with microscopic filaments, which leaves tiny holes in the skin. That doesn't sound particularly pleasant, but it does make delicious wines. And then in the afternoon, obviously the sun comes out and it warms up, and that slows down the development of the rot. And it also causes the water in the berries in the grapes to evaporate out of the little holes. This means that the acids and the flavours and the sugars are really concentrated. And also the botrytis does impart its own distinctive flavours of a sort of honey, apricot, citrus zest into the grape as well. Then once the rot has taken form and it's over the grapes, they are then picked, and obviously once they go through the pressing, it'll be a very concentrated juice, a very concentrated must, because you've lost all that water through the evaporation. Now this wine is from Domaine Cady, and they have been in operation since 1927. They're now run by the fourth generation, Alexandre, and they're situated in the hills of Côte de Léon, which is an appellation by the Léon River in Loire's Anjou region. They've got 22 hectares under vine, and it is predominantly Chenin Blanc that they grow. And the Côte de Léon is their sort of flagship wine. It's the one that they really focus and concentrate on. The grapes are harvested by hand, and that's because they do want the grapes that have had the full effects of the noble rot, and that is something that you can't determine, and you can't pick by machine. So they are harvested by hand, and obviously it happens at different levels or at different timings. The rot takes hold at different timings. So they undergo several pickings. So they will work the vines on consecutive days to be able to pick the grapes that are affected at the right level of noble rot to keep the consistency in the vintage as a whole. And then once they are in the winery, they then vinify the grapes in temperature-controlled, glass-lined underground vats to retain the freshness. So they are wanting to keep the freshness that they have got while still keeping those really nice noble rot qualities. They then let the wine mature on its lees, and that is what I think gives the really creamy, nutty texture to it. I mean, it's almost like a sort of a frangipan sort of smell there. And the lees are the dead yeast cells. So it matures on the lees, stays in the tank while it's maturing, and they're imparting that texture and that richness and body to the wine. If anyone has got that one, let me know, and let me know your thoughts. Gil, are there any questions on this one at all yet?
So I do actually have a question myself. If I may, a comment as well there, just on the price of that wine. As you're explaining that wine and all these different concepts that go into it, the hand harvesting, the multiple passes, and all the aging process that goes with it. It's incredible value, this wine, I think, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
At what is it, $14.50? I think it's just fantastic. But with this wine, you mentioned all these different flavor characteristics and complexities. How do you see this wine aging and maturing?
So this one, it is one that I think it's got enough concentration and enough of the sort of structural acidity to age. We've given it a drink date of sort of up to 2027. I think it probably could go a little longer than that because the acidity really is there. I think you'll find it will go into a more nutty complexity, and you'll find that the qualities are going towards the nuttier and the honeyder elements. You'll lose the freshness of the fruit. You might get a little bit more of a dried fruit, so you might start to get a bit more of a candied peel quality to it. And in terms of the botrytis, that can also have an effect that it will go to a slight, almost hay sometimes, a bit of a quality like that, like a sweet hay as well. So you'll definitely see some really nice development, and it'll be more towards that dried fruit, so some dried apricot, dried apple. But I mean, it's just a lovely wine. I'd say it's pairing very nicely with a baked apple and a little Calvados cream. Oh, Kath, can we come to yours for dessert next time? Was there anything else, Gil, or was that the...
Not at this moment, no. Although I'll mirror what you're saying. It's making me very hungry hearing these food pairings. And quite interesting when you mentioned about the palate cleanser. I think that a lot with the Moscato, as that sort of almost in between courses, just a nice palate freshener.
Yeah,
rather than
really
say you sort of paired it with sorbet, but it could almost be a sorbet in its own right in that kind of.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's what a lot of these lovely dessert wines are about as well. You know, if you're having a dinner party and you've got someone that just can't quite manage a dessert, I bet your bottom dollar they would manage a little glass of something sweet and delicious. Lovely. Oh, Linda's got the 2003 currently, and it's still lovely. There you go. So it definitely will be aging. Obviously, you know, it does take into account how you're keeping it, how you're storing it, but if you're keeping it in a cool, consistently cool sort of temperatured cellar or wherever you're able to keep your wines, it will be absolutely fine. Now, we're going on to the third wine, which is the Chateau Pascaud, which is a Monbazillac. And this is also a wine that has had noble rot on the grapes, but we're going to near, let me just glug that away, near the region that you're probably more expecting this wine to be from. Now, you will likely have noticed, just make a little spill there, you will have no doubt noticed that we've not included any Sauterne in the event this evening. And that was a decision on my part, that I wanted to be able to talk about some wines that are just as good, if not better, some different styles of sweet wines. I think Sauterne often gets turned to as the one of the, not only, but perhaps, a standard dessert wine. Often it will see that way on dessert menus and wine lists in restaurants. I just wanted to look at something that was a little bit different. However, this Monbazillac does use the same grape varieties, and it's made in the same sort of way, very near to where you would get a Sauterne, but it's a fraction of the price. I mean, it's a full 75 centilitre bottle for $13.50, I think it is, which makes it remarkable value if you are having a big party and you want to get a sweet wine in for everyone. And it does have a lighter touch to it than a Sauterne. It's that little bit lighter. The flavours aren't quite as concentrated or intense. It's got a lovely, ripe, peachy apricot nose. I mean, there's a bit of tinned mandarin in there for me. That's almost a little bit bitter, or it's got a little bit of astringency. Perhaps even a bit of candied grapefruit or something, or some pink, grapefruits and syrup. But it's also got a really nice vanilla and a little bit of a slight smokiness, and a little bit of a sweet pastry, and then obviously the honey qualities from the noble rot. This one is a wine that I would recommend pairing with something like a creme brulee, a creme caramel, meringue, desserts that have a high proportion of sugar in the recipe, and in a way that the sugar is the kind of focal point. So obviously with a meringue, it's only 2 ingredients and one of them is sugar. Obviously then with a creme caramel, the caramel, and a creme brulee, both of them have the caramel aspect. So anything that's got a burnt sugar or a cooked sugar aspect, this is a wine that I would really, really highly recommend pairing it with. Again, you've got the acidity that will balance through and zip through any of the over sort of cloying sweetness of the, I keep saying cloying, I don't mean that in a negative way, but just in a textural way, so that we can appreciate sort of the effect as how it feels in your mouth. But the acidity is there, and it's just got a really really nice toastiness to it as well, which does put it in a lovely balance with anything that's had a bit of a cooked element. So when you're making a meringue, I don't know how many of you are avid dessert makers, but it's one that, depending on the sugar you use, perhaps if you're using a golden caster sugar, you're going to get that caramelized effect, perhaps almost like a little barley sugar quality to it. But it is that bit lighter in texture and mouthfeel than a Sauterne, which I think does help and keep it really quite refreshing. It would also be a really great wine for something like perhaps like a summer pudding. You've got your bread and all of your fruit soaked in, because you've got a lovely richness of fruit and a lovely richness of the wine, but it's still got that freshness that you would want and need as well. Again, it's the noble rot method. So the botrytized grapes are used. And this is from Chateau Pascaud, which is located in the heart of Monbazillac. Now, Monbazillac is a appellation d'origine contrôlée, which is the vineyard is sorry, the winery is in the town of Pomport, and it's right in the heart of the Montbazillac sort of vineyard region. So they overlook the Dordogne Valley and the town of Bergerac. And the Dordogne Valley, obviously with the Dordogne River, is where you're going to get the nice mists off of the river to give you the damp mornings, and then being slightly up on the hill away from the river, you're then going to get the warmth and the sun. The image you can see now is, I mean, it's stunning, isn't it? It's the castle of La Pescavi. It's from around, I think, the 13th century. I mean, it is really quite a stunning place. And its current owner is Denis Truchel. He has been working with it with his father and has now taken over, and they expanded the vineyard until they reached the 22 hectares that are worked today. 16 of those hectares are planted to the white varieties that are used in this wine. So that is predominantly Semillon. There is some Sauvignon Blanc, and there is also some Muscadel. So like I say, they are the grape varieties that are also used in the Sauternes region. So if you're familiar with Sauternes and you like a Sauternes, then this is one to look to if you're wanting something a little bit more budget friendly, a little bit more crowd pleasing, or just a little bit lighter, a little bit more delicate in comparison. It's not a delicate wine, but comparatively you could consider it to be. Interesting thing about Semillon, it's not often, or not often, but it's often only seen in certain iterations. So in a sweet wine like this, or in terms of dry wines, it's often things like a Hunter Valley Semillon from Australia. The good thing about Semillon as a grape, which makes it work really well with these botrytized sweet wines, it's got lovely thin skins, so it's very susceptible to the rot being able to take hold of the grapes. Now, this has also had some maturation in oak, and that has been to add a bit of texture and a little bit of a oaky quality, which is where your vanilla and the pastry and that sort of slight smoky burnt wood in a sweet sort of smoky wood comes through. But it's not overpowering, it just adds to the balance and the textural element of the wine. Mark's asking, why is it better value than Sauternes? Well, Mark, Sauternes is obviously quite a prestigious wine, and obviously in Sauternes and in other regions that are using, that are making botrytized wines, you have got the element that you're not always going to get a noble rot each harvest. So that can have an effect on it. Obviously, wines, Sauternes being from Bordeaux, there is that premium for it being a very well-known wine region, very well sort of respected. The Bordelais are very proud of their Sauternes, as they should be. But when you're just moving away from that region, you're moving somewhere that's a little bit easier to get land in. I mean, the land in Sauternes, it's 5 to 20 times more expensive than in Montbazillac. You know, it's cheaper to just be there and make it in Montbazillac and still get the real nice quality of the wine. But there's a few reasons, but those are some of them, which I hope answers your question there. Gil, I do realise I've jumped ahead and looked at the question myself, but if there are any others that are coming through, do throw them my way.
That is fine. I was going to mention, because you mentioned the vanilla is part of the flavouring, but then obviously you touched upon the reasons for that and coming from the oak. Do we find that Montbazillac as a whole tend to age in oak, like they would do in Sauternes Barsac? Is that kind of still?
It's less of a aging in oak, more just having some maturation in oak. The wines obviously can age. This one, a good few years, and again, you'll get similar to the Côte de Léon, you'll get a similar element that the botrytized characteristics will be coming through. So you'll get more of the honey, more of the sort of candied peel quality. but they are also made in a way that they're not intended for, or this one at least is not intended for real long-term aging. So it's more just of a bit of a textural aspect rather than wanting to set it up for real long aging. I don't think in comparison to say Sauternes, I don't think the concentration of fruit for this one specifically is there for it to go more than, say, 5 years. I may be wrong. You know, someone might have some and find it's gone really nice and nectary and really nice, like sort of honey, almost like a mead. But it's made in a fresh way and in a nicely accessible way to be able to drink it relatively young, or to drink it as close to its vintage. I mean, this is a 2018, so this is already a few years old. So it can age, but I don't think the idea of having them to age as long as a Sauternes is there. And it's interesting as well. I don't know if anyone has both the Montbazillac and the Côte de Léon. It's interesting to see in comparison. They've been both made with the same method, but obviously the original grape variety has such a big impact on it. So the Côte de Léon being the Chenin, and then the Montbazillac being the Semillon, the Sauvignon Blanc, and the Moscato. It really does change how the wine is. So, you know, if you were thinking, oh, I don't know if I necessarily like botrytized wine, or you've had one before that you didn't particularly like, it would be interesting. I would find it interesting if you then try a different style. I mean, the next one, the fourth wine that we are going to take a look at, has also had noble rot, but it is again a different style of wine is made, and it's from a different region. So if no one's got any other questions at the moment for that one, we will move on. So the next one that we are going on to is the Liberator Napoleon Bonaparte 5, which is special edition. Let me just pour a little of this one. So this is in a half bottle, this one. So it does mean that it's slightly, I don't want to say not as good value, but you know, you're only getting a half bottle for not too much less than the price of the one just before. This one does have a lot of residual sugar in it. So this is over 160 grams of residual sugar, which, I mean, sugar is one of those things that you perhaps can't smell, or it's difficult to say that you can smell it, but what you're really smelling is the ripeness of the fruit here. If you do have more than one glass and you're able to do a side-by-side comparison, I'd really recommend that you do, because it's quite remarkable the difference that you're getting in the wine. So like I say, this is the Liberator Napoleon Bonaparte 5. It's a noble late harvest, which is another way of saying it's had noble rot wine, noble rot grapes to make it. It is only at 10% alcohol, so comparatively with the other two, it's that little bit lower in alcohol. And this one is a blend. So this is 64% Muscat and 36% Chenin Blanc, and it's from South Africa. Obviously the Chenin is a really well-known variety from South Africa, and also Muscat. Obviously, if you're perhaps familiar with Constantia wines, the Muscat grown in the Constantia region is really quite known within the wine world. But this one is, I mean, it's real ripe tropical fruit on there. There's pineapple and melon and maybe some passion fruit with, there is some stone fruit still, so some apricot and peach, but it is really concentrated. It's almost like a peach puree. It's just delicious. if you have this one, hopefully you'll be able to feel as well the sugar in texturally. You'll be able to feel the viscosity of the wine with the amount of sugar that this one has, or residual sugar that this one has got in there. But it still does have a really, really delicious fresh acidity cutting through. It keeps it nice and taut and precise. I mean, this is one that I think will just be able to go on for ages. It's got that real intense concentration. It's got the acidity, it's got the structure there. I think we are thinking 2030, so a good 10 years for this one. And of course, in a half bottle, it will mature and develop that bit quicker. But I mean, it's glorious. So let me know if you've got this one. But again, it's the noble rot is the method to keep this one sweet. And in terms of something to pair it with, I'd say things like apricot tarts, pineapple upside down cake, really ripe summery passion fruit cheesecakes or tarts, or anything with a real intense fruit aspect to it. And things as well, maybe like something like a crepe Suzette. That would be a really nice pairing. Or again, you've got that caramelized sugar aspect to it, but the tropical fruit, I mean, it's really something. I know we've said as well, so obviously the recommendations that I'm making now obviously can be interchangeable with the dessert, because a lot of it does come down to what else you're having. So obviously if you've got a cheesecake, often you might have a coulis on it, or a layer of like a fruit gel layer. So that will have an impact in the decision on what dessert to have. Similarly with things like meringue, you know, if you're going to make a pavlova and pile it all up with some passion fruit and some like kiwis, then this will be a wine to have, because you've got that fruit partnership. You're looking at like for like. If you do have this one, let me know what you're thinking. It's just, I can't stop smelling it. It's so delicious.
I have one question, actually. It's not a question that I don't think either of us will be able to answer. It's one more for the Liberator themselves, but why only half bottles would be a question.
Well, I'll tell you a bit about the Liberator, which I can't exactly answer why this one is only a half bottle, but I think it will perhaps go some way to explaining why it's likely to only be a half bottle. So members, if you are familiar with the Liberator as a label, you may be, you may not be. It's one that we've had many a Liberator wine, and they are quite interesting in their individuality. They are the brainchild, I would say, of Richard Kelly, MW, and he is a very respected authority on South African wine. And he wanted to sort of liberate some of the wines of South Africa, and created this sort of ever-changing range that has all different styles of wine, you know, looking at the grapes that you would get in South Africa and the styles of wine, and it's ever-changing. This one, the Napoleon Bonaparte 5, is actually a special edition which is exclusive to the Wine Society. So there's a few Liberator wines that are exclusive just to ourselves. There are some that are exclusive to other wine merchants, and there are also a sort of range that he's got that are episodes which are much more sort of regularly changing. And it does mean as well that the producer to make the wine and where the grapes are grown changes as well within the Liberator. So they're the label sort of overall, but they use their connections and friends within South Africa. That's one of the really nice things I think about South Africa and South African winemaking, is how collaborative it is. So this wine is produced by the Nederberg Wine Estate. Let's hold the bottle up again. It's got an amazing label. So it's the Nederberg Wine Estate in the Paarl Valley, and the winemaker is Gunther Brosel. And because these wines are made in a quite an exclusive while still being available manner. It does mean that they are wines that are only made in smaller quantities. They don't want to be wines that are sort of here forever. This is one that, you know, we've had a couple of vintages of now. This is the 2019 vintage. I think we've had the 2018 as well, but it's one that might not always be on our books or on the Liberator books, and I think, you know, that makes it quite special. The inspiration behind the name, so it's Napoleon Bonaparte 5, is going back to the famous sort of Constantia sweet wines in South Africa, and it comes from the fact that Napoleon, during his 5-year exile, this is for any history buffs out there, so for his 5-year exile on St. Helena, he found solace in consuming a bottle of Constantia every day, which got him through that exile. The documents that were dated from October 1816 through to the 30th of June 1817, which are titled Statement of the Wines Supplied for General Bonaparte's Establishment, shows that the 3-month tally was around 90 bottles. And he kept a cache for his exclusive enjoyment and is believed to have asked for a glass shortly before he died. So that's the inspiration behind the naming of that. All the Liberator wines have some really good names and really good labels. So if perhaps for some reason this sweet one isn't doing it for you, do take a look at the other Liberator wines, particularly at the moment with wanting to sort of support South Africa. I think they make such delicious wine in such a collaborative way. It's a shame that they aren't always, or they haven't in the past year or so, been able to reap the rewards as they rightly should. But do let me know. I feel a slight broken record with this one, but do let me know what your thoughts are on this wine. It might be, I have a feeling perhaps that maybe people are waiting for the Samos. Perhaps they've bookended and gone with the Moscato and then the Samos.
We do have a question, actually. It's a question that would involve all of the wines this evening. So okay. It may be a question to come back to. It's a great question. I'll give you a hint there to do with cheese and sort of pairing with cheeses, but perhaps a question to come back to once we've had a look at that final wine.
Okay.
If you want, we can go now.
No. No, we will save it and come back to it.
But I wondered with the Liberator wine, given the high levels of residual sugar in the wine, although it's got that balance from the acidity, would you drink this more chilled than, say, some of the other wines that are slightly lower residual sugars? Would you have this in a more super chilled?
Personally, I would not serve it as chilled. I've tried to, so in the email and obviously at the start when I said to try and have them all out, is that I've tried to, so that in the order of tasting, if you had them all out at the start of the event, by the time you get to the Liberator, which we've just done, and the Samos, which we're just getting to, they will have warmed up slightly from being straight from the fridge cold. Now, I don't know about anyone else. My fridge is quite cold. I'm not entirely sure the temperature you're meant to have your fridge at, but mine is definitely on the cooler side. And so obviously for the Moscato to Asti, that works really nicely. And even for the Côte de Leon and the Montbazillac, because they're ever so slightly lighter in style, and obviously the Moscato is got some bubbles to it. You do want them to still have be a bit cooler and have that freshness. The Liberator, I think, I mean, at the temperature it is now, going by a general feel, going by hands, I would say it's probably getting on from maybe around like 9 degrees now, which I think is a really nice temperature to be having it at, because it really lets the fruit come through. The worst thing that you can maybe do with a wine is, particularly obviously with a white wine or a rosé wine, is to chill it too much. It will just dull any of the aromas and the flavors there. It is a good tip if you have a wine that you're not particularly fond of, or you know, if someone gives you a wine that's perhaps not to your taste, the more you chill it, the less you can taste it. But you don't want to do that with something like this. You want to be able to have the fruit come through. And I think even though it's that lower alcohol, it's only the 10%, you do have the freshness still from the acidity. It really is there, and the concentration of fruit. So you don't want to dull it away and lose that by having it too cold. Of course, once it starts to feel like it's going a little bit syrupy, like a little bit too much like honey, or feeling a bit too thick, pop it back in the fridge. You know, it's not necessarily one that you would want to leave out on the table for the entire time that you're, you know, having enjoying it. It's definitely one that you can pop back in the fridge, let it cool up again, and or cool down again, and then re-pour it. But of course, it depends as well how you're holding your glass, what sort of glass you've got it in. If you are using, you know, if you're having a party and you perhaps don't have enough stemware, and you might have to resort to some tumblers, then if you're holding it with the palm of your hand, you're going to have it warm up that bit faster. So I would err on the side of having it a little bit cooler than ideal straight into the glass, and then give it a few minutes to just let itself come to temperature a little bit more, let itself acclimatise to the room, and just really get the fruit coming through. You'll get such a difference. I mean, going back to this now, I mean, even now it's been in the glass for what, maybe 8 minutes, and you know, it's that little bit warmer, and the fruit's taken on a bit of a new dimension. We're getting a little bit more into a sort of a baked fruit, a bit of a dried fruit. It's not as juicy and fresh, still delicious, but a little bit different. Now, depending on a dessert I was having this with, obviously I've tailored and thought about this evening in terms of desserts that you would be more likely to have in the sort of summer seasons, in the warmer weather. So not a warm dessert perhaps, and not something like an apple pie and custard. You're having something cooler, or at least room temperature, then I would perhaps say, oh, okay, we need to pop this back in the fridge, or top it up a little bit with some that's been in the fridge, just to keep it a little bit fresher. But it comes down to how you're serving it and what you're having it with. There's you can do a lot of bit of trial and error. It's going to be a delicious wine either way, but you can work it out. And as well, I think with a lot of sort of food and wine pairing, it's as much about how you're drinking it in the environment you're in, and how you're enjoying it with the people you're around you, or if you're just enjoying a glass on your own after, you know, at the end of the week. That adds such an impact on how you will enjoy a wine as well. So in terms of serving, in a long way, in terms of serving and temperature, it's something to take into account. Ideally not too cold, but also don't let it get too warm, but also don't worry about it too much. You know, see how it works for you. And again, it really depends as well on the temperature of your fridge. I have a feeling mine is maybe slightly too cold, but you know, that's something that I can experiment with over the weekend. Now, if you have the Samos, pour yourself a glass of it now, because it is, I don't want to say the best wine, but it is one of the best wines, and I'm really pleased that I've managed to include it in this evening. Just in comparison by colour, I mean, you look at that, it's just so dark and caramelized, it's beautiful. But it's also one to look at, and don't be put off by the colour. You're not going necessarily down the like real sweet sherry, although I love sherry, or a sweet sherry or a sweet Madeira, that can sometimes feel a little much for, personally, I find a little much for a particularly hot day, or a dessert, sort of a lighter dessert pairing. Now, let's bring this one up. Perfect. So this is the Samos, It's from Greece. We've done a lot about wines from Greece recently. This one hasn't featured as much, but I'm very pleased to be able to feature it this evening. It's one that I first actually tried at a wine society tasting when I'd first joined the wine society, and I went along as a helper when I was still in member services. And it's just the nose is just so much caramel and sort of real dark honey and like a molasses, but also a real nice citrus. There's some lovely orange there and a bit of barley sugar, perhaps. That really nice sort of demerara sugar. That's one that I won't use the spittoon for. It's definitely one that's a real treat of a dessert wine, or wine to have with a dessert. But it's lovely, and like I say, it's like that real nice caramel and burnt sugar again, but definitely still got a nice acidity there. And the other aspect with this one that is likely to be quite noticeable in comparison is the alcohol. So this one is a 15% volume, which, as wines go nowadays, it's not overly high, and it's a little different to a sweeter sherry or a Madeira that are that much higher. Interestingly, talking about temperature in terms of serving temperature, I just noticed on the back of the bottle, this one is recommended temperature of around 12 to 14. So I think mine is still ever so slightly on the cooler side, which I think as it warms up, it will just come out that bit more. And in the fruits, you've got lovely sort of golden raisin and a bit of dried apricot there. Really delicious. So in terms of pairing desserts or treats with this one, think things like baklava, which, kind of understandable being a Greek wine. Anything that's got a real nuttiness and real syrupy quality with some lovely flaky pastry, choux pastry as well. Particularly if you've maybe got some eclairs or anything with a chocolatey element. And this as well is if you are having a chocolate dessert in the summer, so perhaps a bit of an intense chocolate mousse or a chocolate torte, chocolate delice, this is the wine to go for. It's got the richness and the concentration of that lovely dried fruit, that molasses character. It's almost got a little cocoa to it as well. If you're having, say, I don't know, something like a chocolate orange cheesecake, which might be quite a niche suggestion of a dessert, but this would just pair beautifully. In terms of the method for this one, we're moving away from the noble rot. This one is actually a vin de naturel, which means, like the Moscato d'Asti, the fermentation has been stopped. It's been stopped, I wouldn't necessarily say prematurely, but it's been stopped in a way that it's just not been allowed to finish naturally. But the way that this one has been stopped is by having a light fortification, because it has only taken it to 15%, but with a bit of a neutral grape spirit. So you have got that in there as well, which has, although it's a neutral grape spirit, coupled with the flavors and the aromas of the wine, you've got that quality of almost like a perhaps like a brandy or sort of a Calvados or slight liqueur quality to it as well, which hence something like a crepe Suzette, or perhaps you were having, I don't know, like a rum barber, something that's got some other alcohol on there. This wouldn't be too much of a shock to the system in terms of having them both together. It really is a delicious wine. It's from Samos, so it's off the island of Samos, which was the wines from Samos were the first to be awarded the AOC status. And Samos is actually also the name of the the cooperative on the island, which was founded in 1934, and we've got a lovely picture there of some of the vineyards on the island. They've got around 1,600 hectares in all, many of which are about 800 meters above sea level, which are high up in the Ambelos Mountains. And they've got really nice deep soils, which allow the vines to dig really deep and have really nice concentrated fruit. You should hopefully maybe be able to see a little bit here, where the vines, they look almost sort of bobbly in comparison to the vineyards and that you may be familiar with. So it's where they've been trained quite low to the ground and sort of this little bush vine, which does help with the real concentration of the fruit, and it allows the vines not to get too leafy, so it concentrates their efforts into the fruit. The altitude, as you can see in the background there, you can see the lovely blue haze where the sea's meeting the sky. I think it just makes us all want to go on holiday. I don't know about anyone else, but the altitude really allows the grapes to ripen nice and slow and steady, which means that the sugar levels develop quite highly and makes them perfect for a sweet wine production. And the muscat really is, I mean, again, this is white muscat, which is the Muscat Petit Blanc Petit Grand, which is the same muscat as the Moscato that we started with. There are different types of muscat, but please don't ask me to name all of them. There are a lot in the wine world, but they make up the 97% of the whole vineyard area. And the grape spirit is just made from, or the neutral spirit is just made from grapes. It's, in itself, it's not got any real flavour. It's not dissimilar to something like grappa, but it's just used to not impart much of a flavour to the wine, but just enough of a higher amount of alcohol to stop the yeast from working. Just kills off the yeast to stop that fermentation, which raises the alcohol a little bit, but retains the sugar to have that lovely intensity, that lovely raisiny sweetness. So yeah, that is the fifth and final wine of the event this evening. Gil, I think that we may have some questions, or that was the question we were going to come back to.
Indeed, I think we're all going to go away and try this chocolate orange cheesecake that you mentioned as well over the weekend. That sounds delicious. But yes, I did promise. We've got a question here from Chris Benneworth on dessert wines with cheese. So they've written, we like having dessert wines with cheeses. Which of tonight's wines would you pair with which cheese?
With which cheese? Okay, lovely. I like talking about cheese as well. So the only one that I would say don't pair with a cheese, just because I think it wouldn't necessarily be awful, but it might be a little bit of a waste, would be the Moscato d'Asti, unless you are having perhaps some sort of like a ricotta. So say you had a bit of a whipped ricotta or something on some pastry, excuse me, that would be a nice way. But I assume, oh, excuse me, let me just take a sip. I assume you're talking about cheese as in a sort of a savoury cheese course. So the other four wines would be ones that you would absolutely could have with cheese, and also are perhaps more likely to be had with cheese, depending on what country you're in, to have with something savoury rather than always having them with a dessert. I think in the UK, definitely we're quite on the idea of a sweet wine as a dessert wine, but not so in other countries. Now, let's start from where we've just ended. So the Samos, they recommended is one to have with intense cheeses. I think it's got enough going for it that you would be able to have it with something like a Stilton or similar blue cheese. I wouldn't necessarily, although Greece is known as where you can get a lot of like nice goat's cheeses, I don't think it's one that you would want to have. I think that's too much of a bit of a flavour clash there. But the Samos, definitely say a blue cheese, So something like a Stilton, something that you would want to have. It's this sort of cheese that you would similarly have a sherry or a port with. You can absolutely go for the Samos with that. The Liberator is very ripe. So I would say you could have something like a semi-hard cheese. Maybe, let's have a think. I would think maybe even something like a Wensleydale would be really nice. Something that's got a bit of creaminess to it, but isn't too sharp and salty. Although saying that, you've got those lovely, lovely pineapple flavors. So you could go, very nostalgic and, make a slightly classier version of a cheese and pineapple and have some, nice mature cheddar with it. I think that would be a really nice way to enjoy it, and much nicer than a cheese and pineapple hedgehog. So yeah, something like a nice salty cheddar or maybe a Wensleydale with the Liberator. The Montbazillac. So the Montbazillac, I would maybe say again something like a Stilton, something with the Stilton with a bit of blue to it, or similarly on the other side of the cheese wheel, if we're thinking that way, maybe something like a brie or something a little softer, a little gooier, because the acidity again is very fresh, and you can cut through the fattiness and the richness of the cheese. So yeah, maybe a brie for that. And I think with the Coteau de Leon, I would be more likely to go for a more delicate cheese. So maybe like a softer sheep's cheese, or a slightly creamier cheese. So maybe back to the sort of Wensleydale. I know I'm very focused on British cheeses. That's where my cheese habits mainly lie. If you are really interested in cheese and wine, we do have a cheese and wine event coming up. So have a look at the calendar for that. And we've also got some recordings of previous ones on our YouTube channel. So you can have a look at those for some inspiration as well. And I've just seen that Tim has made a suggestion for the Moscato. Now this is something I'm going to try, because obviously I've not tried cheese with Moscato, but Tim is suggesting something like a light creamy Italian blue cheese, something like a dolce latte, which actually sounds delicious. I know cheese was the original question, but I will tell you something that does go really nicely with the Moscato, and that is a bacon sandwich. And that is what, for the last four years, we've had as our Christmas Day breakfast, which is a bacon sandwich and Moscato d'Asti, which works beautifully. You've got that lovely salt and sweet combination. But again, you will have that with the wines and the cheeses. See, all the cheeses will have that element of saltiness to them, definitely in comparison to the sweetness of the wine. And you look at the rise of things like salted caramel and how much of a sweet and salty popcorn it's a flavor that everyone or a lot of people respond to well. So yeah, definitely get some cheeses out if you're not a dessert person, and if you are both a cheese and dessert person, have them all together.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that pairing of Moscato with bacon sandwich.
Yeah.
I was reluctant to say that a favourite pairing of mine with it was pepperoni pizza, but I thought
delicious.
It's probably not the thing to say. But I've said it now. You gave me that confidence. Tim, alongside the dolce latte, Tim also, I believe, has a poll ready.
Oh yeah,
or a poll will be ready to members, just to see what your favourite wines were this evening.
And if you've not had a wine, any of the wines this evening, but you've had them in the past, you can of course use that to influence your vote. Or perhaps if you feel that you now are gonna maybe experiment with some of the wines, try them out. Do pop your votes on. Let us know what you might be
whilst
buying.
That is on there as well, Catherine, before we reveal what the winning wine is, could we ask you the same question, because I know you can't vote. Which of these wines is your
this
favorite?
This is really difficult. They're all very delicious, and they're all very different, which is one of the reasons that I wanted them together, I think. My absolute winner for versatility, you know, you can have it from breakfast till a nightcap. We've ascertained you can have it with all sorts of food, and you can have it with ice cream. Ice cream is one of my favorite desserts. So I think the Moscato Lassi is my absolute favorite, with the Liberator coming in a close second. But I would absolutely enjoy all of them. They would all find a place on my table.
The Liberator is actually a wine in that lineup that I haven't tried yet. Full
Well,
disclosure,
Gil,
I've never tried, but on the back of what you've been saying about it in your description, it's certainly going to be in my basket next time
absolutely.
I'm purchasing.
Now it looks like we do have the results. Oh, the Moscato. So the Moscato has come third. In second place, we've got the Monbazillac. And then in first place, the Samos, which I think is just a really nice overview of three very different styles from this evening, but all getting some good votes. And, you know, the Liberator and the Cote de Leon, both crackers as well. So there we go. And were there any other questions for a skill?
No, members, if you do have a burning question, you have about a minute or so, please pop it in the Q&A or in the chat and we can answer that question.
Tim
Otherwise, if you think of anything when we've finished, you can always send an email to us and we can answer those.
Tim's just confirmed that all the wines got votes, which is lovely because it's very difficult. It's like asking someone to choose a favoured child, isn't it, to choose a favoured wine? And why would you want to choose when you've got so many to be able to enjoy?
Absolutely.
Lovely. So it looks like we haven't got any questions coming in, but like we said, if you do have any or any come to you over the weekend, perhaps while you're finishing off a bottle in the sunshine, do drop us an email. We can get back to you on that. But thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the wines if you've had them. And I hope you really enjoy the sun this weekend. Thank you. Cheers.